Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's program, The Silver Tsunami, the Hidden Epidemic of Older Adults with Addiction Disorders. I'm Dennis Grantham, Editor-in-Chief of Behavioral Healthcare Magazine. Today's program has been sponsored by Caron Treatment Centers and the Hanley Centers. Note that as of July 1st this year, a year-long effort to combine the operations of these two organizations into one organization has been completed. So Caron and the Hanley Center are now one. Thank you to them and to you for joining us and for your time and attention today. Before we get started, let me introduce you to a couple of housekeeping details. We have an interactive program today. Each window is being displayed. Each window that's being displayed on your screen is adjustable and can be moved around, enlarged, or downsized according to your preferences. Our speaker will answer questions at the end of this presentation, so please use the red Q&A widget, the Q&A button right below the slides on your screen, to submit a question at any time during the presentation. Sooner the better. If you get to the front of the queue, that's always better. On your left, below the speaker information, is a resources area where you can download a PDF of today's slides as well as any handouts that are referenced during the presentation. If you have any technical issues, like if your sound doesn't work or something throughout today's program, please use the yellow help widget at the bottom of the screen, and you can troubleshoot the issue or submit a question about it. For those seeking CE credit, you must be registered and logged in for today's program to receive credit. And upon completion of the program, just stay here in the conference room and we'll ask you to click on the green CE certificate widget at the bottom of your screen. This will generate your CE certificate. Audience members are also invited to share their thoughts on Twitter, and the Twitter widget can be accessed by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen. Simply click the post button, then the authorize button to log into your account, and then you can begin sharing. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Juan Harris. Juan joined the Hanley Center in 1997, where he began a career and a deep commitment to the field of recovery services. He became a certified addictions counselor in 2000 and is now clinical director of the Hanley Center's Center for Older Adult Recovery. He's an alumnus of the nonprofit J Ministry in Palm Beach County. Juan has been chairman of the board of directors and a dedicated volunteer and board member at J Ministry. He's an active leader in the Florida addiction field. He's a past member of the Florida School of Addiction Studies Board of Directors and a member of the advisory board for the Florida Certification Board. He's also a presenter, trainer, and evaluator for the State of Florida Certification Board. Juan has certainly presented nationally on the complexity and diagnosis of substance abuse and dual diagnosis dependency among older adults. He's given all sorts of guest lectures on substance abuse issues at regional colleges and universities. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology with a concentration in substance abuse counseling from Palm Beach Atlantic University, and he's currently pursuing his doctoral degree. So Juan, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. And with that, let me turn the audience to you.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for a warm introduction. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. Today I'm going to talk to you about a subject that's very prominent in the United States today, and it's about the hidden epidemic of older adults and baby boomers as it relates to addiction disorders. Aging and addiction, and the reason that I call it the silent epidemic is because it is vastly underaddressed and undertreated. And the Silver Tsunami is that because of baby boomers aging between 1946 and 1964, there were approximately 80 million births in this country. It's the largest birth years in this country's ever seen. And those baby boomers are aging. 10,000 people are turning 65 years old every day. and that's the Silver Tsunami of aging boomers. And what we're seeing with this is indicating a problem well beyond the current scope of care of treatment centers across this country, and this will create a tremendous burden on health care and other social services. You know, the tragedy is with many older adults is that they don't receive treatment. Instead, they see their quality of life decline. They see a decline in their health. While older adults may be difficult to convince that they need treatment, the really important thing to remember working with this population is that they have the best and the higher success rates in recovery than other age groups after completing a really quality age-responsive treatment. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So some of the objectives that we're going to address in this presentation, we will look at the diagnostic criteria, how it differs for older adults as compared to younger individuals. We'll also explore the effects and the risk factors and the protective factors as it relates to looking at this illness with older adults. And we'll look at some of the signs and symptoms and the differences and similarities in treatment therapies that are appropriate in treating this really, really special population. Now, another thing that's important to look at, we want to begin with looking at how aging is changing in America. In the year 1900, if a person lived to be 50 years old, that was considered to be very, very old. And here we are in little over 110 years later, people are living well into their 80s. And so with this increased life expectancy, we're really seeing a burden and a change in how service is delivered in this country. In continuing with that thought, as aging is changing in this country, we find that more and more older adults are using illicit drugs and alcohol. For example, when we look at the alcohol use related to illicit drug use to people over 55, we see where it once was less than 1%, we can see how that's beginning. Alcohol use in the same population has increased, and with older adults, heavy alcohol use, we see the percentages there for 55 and older. Okay? Well, what are they using? In this study in 2009, we're still seeing, in terms of admissions to treatment programs, that alcohol is still the #1 drug across all programs, whether it's younger individuals, men, women, older adults, and baby boomers. But there's starting to be a really significant increase in the amount of illicit drug use among older adults as compared to the numbers in the previous 10 years for using things like cocaine, marijuana, heroin. Those increases are phenomenal with this older population. Anecdotally, what we thought we were seeing with these changes in drugs, we thought we were seeing what we would call early onset older adults. These would be people that started using at a younger age, and once they aged over 55 or 60, they were early onset users who really never stopped using illicit drugs. But that's not the case at all. And what it is, it's that it's new first-time use, and we're seeing this in treatment centers of new admissions for first-time use, and it's really not early onset at all, but it's late onset, and I'll talk about that a little more in this presentation. So right now, I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about, well, what are some of the barriers to identifying this problem in the aging population. Okay? And some of the main barriers to identification, one of the number one barriers, of course, is ageism. Well, what is ageism? Ageism is a stereotypical view that professionals, family members, and even the older adults and the boomers themselves, or the addicted person themselves, that will view whatever problem is going on with the older person, aging person, is the result of the aging process. Well, the problem with the ageism assumption and the ageism view is when a person has that stereotypical view, then it stops the person from looking for other etiologies, other causes of what really might be going on with the older adults. One of the biggest groups that are guilty of ageism are family members. Sometimes family members will say, well, you know, dad's had a good life, mom's had a good life, and they've taken care of the family, they've been responsible things, and we don't want to take away their last pleasure. And I've never met an alcoholic or met an addict, a person that was using alcoholically or drinking alcoholically or using addictively, who thought that their alcoholism or their addiction was a pleasure. And so that view is really profound among family members and people closer to the older adults. Failure to recognize symptoms is another huge barrier, and this is a lot of times with the treating professionals. Doctors are really, I don't want to say guilty of this, but they fail to recognize, because a lot of times it's just self-report from the person when they go to the doctor. Well, how much are you drinking? Oh, I'm just having one drink. Well, they're not describing that one drink is one constant drink throughout the day. And while doctors a lot of times are very familiar with drug interactions and prescriptions and that sort of thing, but as it relates to alcoholism and dependency, they're familiar with treating the symptoms that they produce in terms of axis 3 medical conditions, liver conditions, and kidney conditions, and cirrhosis, and pancreatitis, and things that are secondary to the alcohol. But before it gets to that point, there really is a failure to recognize some of the symptoms. Lack of knowledge about screening, and that's another huge one. I will show you some screens that are very easy to follow and use as part of this presentation. Okay. Now, as we look at, I want to take a closer look at barriers and look at what are some of the individual barriers that we have in terms of identifying alcoholism and addiction in older individuals. And those attempts at self-diagnosis. It's not uncommon for people, Dr. Wesley Clark, who's the director of SAMHSA, identified in a report that for 90% of older adult patients who meet the diagnostic criteria for substance dependency, 90% of them will deny that they have a problem. That's an attempt at self-diagnosis. And it's really common in this illness. Description of symptoms attributed to the aging process. Again, that's related to an ageism view. And it's not true that as people age, that one of the myths of aging, that all people become senile, all people as they age will lose their health and strength and their mobility. I recently read the results of a study, and it was a study on centurions, and what that study talked about, the two common threads of people who lived to be 100 years old were using the mind and physical activity. And so when we think about as a person ages and we believe that they should become senile, and that's a huge myth that we see. And a lot of times it's something that's even viewed by, again, family members or treating professionals. Let's take another look at barriers to detection. And when we talk about, well, what roles or values do you think women 60 and over view as important for their marriage? Well, the answer to that question is, well, they're being a caretaker for the family. Well, who is it in the family that's responsible for making the children's appointments? The wife. Who is it that's responsible for knowing the children's sizes? Who is it in the family that sends birthday cards to the husband's family members or holiday cards to the husband's family members? So in a lady that's 60 years old, this is a lady that's raised with someone else first. For most women over 60, if you would ask them, who are you, they would identify themselves as part of other relationships. I had an experience here recently with a lady that was 60 years old, and she was 70. She's older than 60. And her experience was that her role in the family, and her father was a physician, and she wanted to be a physician, and the message that her parents told her, don't you even think about it. You just need to go to school and get a job like being a nurse or being a secretary, roles that were ascribed to women. Well, the importance of this being a barrier is we need to think about what was the message that people got at the family of origins. What messages did they bring forward? And the same when we look at men, 60 and over, what is important for them were they're providers. They're the caretaker. When we look at a man like this, the huge barrier is that this guy was raised by a father who was in WW2 or WW1, or that was the message in the home. And for men, we're strong. We're strong. We don't talk about our stuff. We don't talk about our feelings. We don't eat quiche. We don't cry. We don't wear pink. What does that translate into clinically? It translates into a difficulty asking for help. So again, this is a barrier in terms of looking at getting the treatment and getting access to care for older individuals. Managed care, and with the onset of managed care and health management organizations, that's another barrier that we see, and we see that barrier because a patient can clearly meet diagnostic criteria for residential treatment, but the way that health management and managed care is set up, they want the least restricted modality of treatment first, so a person would need to go to outpatient and fail before they would rather pay for residential treatment. I have this, you have to expect some cutbacks with the new health plan. And I actually had a friend of mine who got a letter from his HMO this week that said they'd only cover his fear of height up to 60 feet. Now, that brings us to our first poll question. Dennis? Okay.
Sure. If you're developing an alcohol-related prevention program for an adult audience, which of the following is important for you to remember while developing the program? Okay. Sensitivity to alcohol is not related to age. Sensitivity remains stable over time. Sensitivity decreases with aging, or sensitivity to alcohol increases with aging. So please submit your answer, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. And then, Juan, it's back to you.
Okay. All right, well, thanks for reading that for me, Dennis. Okay, so let's think about those. And not only sensitivity to alcohol, but sensitivity to medications and everything. So think about that as you're answering those questions. And while you're doing that, okay, good. Okay, well, I can see that our poll results are in, and you all passed. 71% of the audience says sensitivity to alcohol increases with age, and that is absolutely correct. But not only sensitivity to alcohol, but sensitivity to medications as well. So it's important when we think about this aging population and we're looking at diagnostic criteria as it relates to this population, that we have to remember that. So we're going to talk about physiological changes in the body that are part of this sensitivity. Okay? All right. So signs and symptoms. Let's take a look at signs and symptoms and what to look for with this population. Okay? Okay. It's important to, when we're looking for the signs and symptoms with this population, to identify that what may be appropriate for younger individuals may cause failure to identify substance use problems in older individuals. Well, because of age-related changes in the body, we can realize that as people age, wherein doses of medications were therapeutic, what could be therapeutic doses in younger individuals, those same dosages could be almost toxic for an older adult. So let's take a closer look at the people who are involved in symptom identification, which we'll have a better slide with some of the symptoms. But here are the people who are involved. Now, this group includes people that are come in contact with the older adult. I was in a conference here recently in North Carolina Conference on Aging, and I was visiting exhibits, and I was walking around, and there was a gentleman that had prepared meals, and he was talking with the gentleman from the Meals on Wheels program, and I overheard the conversation, and he was saying to him, you know, we can provide meals. We can bring you a week's worth of meals at once. You'd save money on gas. You'd save money on labor. You'd save money. And the gentleman from Meals on Wheels said to him, yes, that's true, but we wouldn't come in contact with the older adult. That's the point. These people here in this slide here, family, clergy, physician, the neighbors, the hairdresser, these are all people who can look for signs and symptoms of alcoholism or addiction or something that's going on with the older individual. As people age, their friend networks shrink a lot of times, so it's important when we're working with older individuals, it's important that neighbors and people have phone numbers and contact information of family members, especially if the children live in other states, which is often the situation, other states, and also that they can get in touch with them. But these are people who are involved in that process of looking for older adults. So now let's take a better look at some of the signs and symptoms. If we'll revisit that again. And here are the signs and symptoms of addiction. And oftentimes these signs and symptoms are misattributed to other illnesses, sleep complaints, health complaints, decline in ADLs. And ADLs are activities of daily living, things such as able to feed themselves, bathe themselves, clothe themselves, transfer themselves from a chair, unexplained burns and bruises. This can be from being disoriented, from medication abuse, and then repeated falls. There are certain drugs that have an additive effect where 1 + 1 = 2. Certain drugs have an antagonistic effect, agonist effect, where you can take one drug and it blocks the receptors. Person doesn't feel the effect of it. And then there's others that are used in combination that can have a synergistic effect. And that combination would be, a lot of times for older adults, would be alcohol and benzodiazepines. And in that sense, 1 + 1 can = 5 and produce what we call a synergistic effect. And that's when you see the falls. And the older adult can be completely honest with family members. I'm only drinking the same amount. I'm only taking the same amount of medication. But what's really going on is with the physiological changes in the body, a little bit becomes more. It's like, it's the body's not handling the alcohol the way it was, and as we revert back to our poll question, the sensitivity increases. Overall hygiene declines, but the big one, the point that I'm going to just take a couple minutes to drive home here on this slide, is memory loss. And the reason I want to talk about memory loss is because the average older person is prescribed 17 prescriptions a year by 4.5 doctors. And out of those prescriptions, the one that's prescribed the most is benzodiazepines. You know, as a psychotropic, it's usually prescribed for general anxiety disorder. A lot of older adults will just get them for sleep complaints, and they're getting them from their primary care physicians. Well, as people with the pharmacological advances in these medications, a lot of these benzos have what we call a longer half-life. And you see extended release, time release. It means a person doesn't have to take it so many times during the day, and it has a longer half-life. Well, when you combine that longer half-life with the physiological changes that are happening in the person's body, where it's not metabolizing or getting rid of the medication as it once did, what happens is it starts to produce certain symptoms. Some of those symptoms are daytime sedation. It can produce, it affects attention, it affects concentration, it affects memory, and these are all signs and symptoms that really mimic, understand me, amnestic disorder or dementia. And so quickly, if the person goes to a treating professional, usually escorted by a family member, an adult child, and they describe these symptoms, and you combine that with an ageism view, and the substance is not brought into the picture, they're quickly given a misdiagnosis of early dementia, early Alzheimer's. And I can tell you that when I get the calls here, and a lot of times one of the big concerns here at Hanley Center, and we're treating in our older adult program from family members, is the loss of memory. Well, you know, I have this conversation. We need to get rid of the alcohol, get rid of the benzodiazepines through a medical detoxification. And one thing that we know, if the problems they're having with their memory is secondary to the substance use, it will improve when we back out the substance. But also what's important to understand about this is that we need to look at lab therapy. We need to look at the lab work that the person comes in with, because we know if a person has really high ammonia levels, then that will lead to cognitive confusion. If a person has a low sodium level, that will lead to cognitive confusion. B12 deficiency is another. So combined with taking will clinically, medically detox the person, but also we're looking for lab levels to get to normal ranges to help clarify what's really going on with the older person. Okay? So dementia is really misdiagnosed a lot for a substance abuser. You have to get the pills out of them. You got to get the booze out of them to really see what's going on. Here we talk about accidental addicts. Now, these are some of those physiological changes in the body that I referred to earlier. As a person ages, the water content decreases. The albumin, which is a protein in the blood that the active ingredient in medications attaches to, that decreases. So therefore, that's why we have that increased sensitivity that we talked about earlier. The liver, kidney, they don't metabolize. These are those physiological changes in the body. The accidental addict part of this is that older adults, when they come into treatment, and they come into treatment with prescription drug problems, well, they don't view themselves as an addict because the doctor gave it to them. And that's prescribed, and the problem with, and they're taking it as prescribed, but the problem with as prescribed is, in the beginning, as prescribed will be 30 pills a month. Then as prescribed becomes 60, 90, and then it gets to the point where it really takes over the person's lives. So here's another look at some of the physiological changes in the body. And so in terms of just finishing up on that accidental addict, it's important to know that in talking with an older adult that they do not identify with the word addict. They see addict as being, you know, that criminalized younger group, you know, not a person their age. And just a quick look here as prescribed, and you sort of get an understanding of what I'm talking about. Okay. And again, this finishing up with accidental addicts, and here are some questions that you can screen with, and you can ask them to really understand, if they understand why they're taking a medication. Because sometimes they'll just start taking a medication, they'll forget what they're taking it for, they'll forget how long they've been taking it, and it's taken because they've just been prescribed it by the doctor and been on it so long. So this is important to have an assessment like this to take a look at that. Okay. So here are some questions that I put out for you to use with your older patients that you work with. What drug have I been prescribed? How does it work? You can take a look at these on your own, and you want to educate your loved one, or certainly your patients, your clients, and the people that you're working with and family members about asking these questions. Also, what you want to do is what I call a brown bag review. Not only are we looking at prescription medications, but we also want to look at OTCs, the over-the-counter medications and all. We know that there's over-the-counter medications that can cause huge problems for people as they age as well. So I call it the brown bag review, and it's important to look at all the prescriptions. As I said earlier, there's 17 prescriptions a year by 4.5 doctors. It's important to get in and to clean up the use of so many different prescriptions. For example, with some of those prescriptions, a person can go to the doctor because they're having headaches, and they can say to the doctor, well, I'm having this headache, I need something, and the doctor will prescribe them something for the headaches, to get rid of the headaches, but it has a side effect that produces discomfort in the stomach area. So when they get that discomfort, they head out to the gastro guy, and their gastro guy will prescribe something that maybe gives them a little pededema, bilateral, swelling in the feet. So what I've just described to you, we can go down the entire body like that, and they're getting prescribed other medications really to treat side effects of a prior medication, and this happens so much. So it's important to do a brown bag review that includes medications and OTCs, and look at all those medications, get releases, so you can talk to those doctors to really get that cleaned up. It's important to do that because with the age-related changes in the body, we can actually see these medications start to produce psychosis and within the person. And a lot of times, again, we're thinking people are being delusional, and it's just too many medications that are in a person's body that's not physically able to they're contraindicated, number one, but they're not physically able to extricate those medications via the liver and the kidney functions that normal people do. The metabolism has changed as they age. I want you to have these questions. These are some questions that you can utilize in terms of for screening and asking questions about medications. So I put those out for you. Let's take a quick look though at the diagnostic criteria as for older adults compared to regular diagnostic criteria. Okay, so here's what we would see as regular diagnostic criteria. There's 7, and you would need 3 of these in a 1-year period, in a 12-month period, to give a diagnosis. But as it comes to older adults, all bets are off. Instead of looking for tolerance, we may look for reverse tolerance or decreased tolerance. As you look down those criteria side by side, it's important to where normally we'd give a diagnosis with a younger individual, we need to apply it differently when we're looking at older adults. Okay? Diagnosis or assessment. Well, when we look at 1.5 ounces of liquor, 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, what do these all have in common? They all have the same amount of booze in them. That's what they have in common. And so it doesn't matter. One of the points that you will see with people as they get to the point of starting to lose control is they'll switch. They'll switch from liquor to beer to wine, and that switch in itself is a measure of loss of control. Let's talk a little bit here about early onset alcoholism and addiction. Early onset is when a person starts drinking early in life, and throughout their lifetime, you can look back over their history and see maybe multiple treatment episodes, multiple detoxes, multiple maybe arrests, DUIs, divorces, just problems in their life overall over a bunch of years that you can associate back to drinking. That's early onset. What's important to remember about early onset is that they need long-term treatment, and the reason that is because they have a well-ingrained denial system many times, and they have no frame of reference of sober living skills. Okay, let's take a look at what we are a late onset. Late onset is usually later in life after 50, and more I am seeing so many late onset, and it's usually after some major life change, whether it's divorce, loss of a spouse, retirement. It's really important to remember that people need to have purpose in their lives, and instead of looking at retirement, we're talking about when working with the older population, we should be looking at refirement. What does the person need to do to reinstill purpose in their lives? Okay? So, continuing with diagnosis and assessment, methods of collecting information, it's important to remember that, a patient self-report can be the least reliable source of information, or it can be the most reliable source of information. We have to remember that they are experts in their own lives, but we need to gather and collect information from other people who have been involved in their life. So that's very, very important to look at different ways of gathering information and where we're going to gather that information from. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the brain and why it's important to look at the brain. With prolonged use of alcohol, alcohol and drugs affect the prefrontal cortex of the brain. That has to do with the logic, the reasoning, the executive functioning of the brain. Okay? And so with prolonged use, the enlargement of the ventricular system, the brain it swells, and the functioning of the brain goes down. It's important to remember that the organ of attack and addiction, the primary organ is the brain. Addiction is a brain disease with biological underpinnings. So, very important to understand that. Let's talk about cohort effects. Okay? Well, what are cohort effects? Cohort effects, and before we talk about that, let's go to our next polling question. Okay. In educating family members about recovery from substance abuse, it is important they understand that families have to change their behavior to accommodate recovery. Family problems not associated with substance abuse will never be exposed. An abuser's marital relationship will improve once the abuser enters recovery. The problems which occur during active substance abuse will now be resolved. Okay, if you go ahead and submit your answers. In talking about cohort effect, it's important to remember that people are a product of the time and the era that they were born. And for baby boomers, for instance, they were born at a time where drug use was encouraged. It was The mantra for the era was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Turn on, tune in, and drop out. And so they were a group that were encouraged to use drug use. It was a group that if you didn't believe or get high, you didn't fit in. So they were a group that were really encouraged to use drugs. So let's look at I can see that 98.1% of you agree that families have to change their behavior to accommodate recovery, and that's absolutely correct. It's important that we know that where people are raised in family of origin, that this is a family illness, and that in order for the family to recover, for the individual to recover, that the entire family has to get recovery to support sobriety. Okay. Sandwich generation, some of the pressures that face baby boomers as they come into treatment, they are involved in 3 generations sometimes of people, their own aging parents, their children leaving home, just launched from home, and even I can call it a club sandwich sometimes because we may even have some smaller grandchildren on board. So the sandwich generation and those pressures, a lot will face older adults and baby boomers. And again, as we talk about families, here's what dysfunctional families are, and let's look at the freedoms associated with, here's dysfunctional families, and let's look at the freedoms of healthy families, okay? And as we can see, healthy families are encouraged to seeing and hearing what is, saying what you feel and think. This is what we call an open family system. And a lot of times for our patients, especially with older adults, they come from a time when children were seen and not heard, and it's important to realize that as we move forward in working with this population. Factors influencing our belief. Again, some of these statements are statements related to ageism type statements, and sometimes within families, it's not families themselves think that a person may be too old to get into recovery, too old to make changes, where people are never too old. I can't tell you about how many times I've received letters from individuals where they've shared about the last 3 years, 6 years, 3 years, 6 months, even 2 months of their life with their loved one being sober, and how important that was to them to spend that time, and that's the legacy. It's about legacy. What does the family remember? How is mom remembered? How is dad remembered? And that's important. It's not about how much time is left in a person's life, but the quality of time. And let's look at our last polling question here. Okay, in educating family members about recovery from substance abuse, it is important that they understand that families, when working with diverse client populations, it is most important to be able to identify mainstream counselor beliefs, appropriate treatment programs, differing cohort effects, and special economic factors. I suppose on this one we'll have some varying percentages. So as we wait on these polling questions, we'll get ready to see what your responses to be. But I think it's very important to understand, a person's family of origin, of where a person comes from and their belief is important. And let's see, we did have I can see from the results, we did have some variability. Appropriate treatment programs was 50%, and differing cohort effects was 38.4%. And I would agree with those would be the top 2. And it's important to have appropriate treatment programs. And the reason that we're having this webinar is to have education about the importance of treating older individuals in groups of people. They respond to groups of people in an age-responsive treatment environment. It's just so important. But within that, we have to look at the cohort from which they come from. And you heard me talk about the example of the lady who wanted to be a doctor, an example of a boomer who's raised by a WW2 father or who is a WW2 or a WW1 boomer themselves. So it's important to consider both of those. So, but a very interesting polling question it is. Okay. So what do we do in treatment? Well, here's what we do in treatment. Here are some of the groups and things that you work with older adults. It's important to still have women and men's groups in older adult treatment. So even though people age, one of the mistakes that I find younger individuals make when they're thinking about working with older individuals is that older adults are not interested in things of sexual matters. Not true. We know that the older adult population is the largest group of increased rate of sexual transmitted diseases. You know, they're very interested in things of a sexual nature. But some of the groups in the treatment with older adults, we want to also work with trauma. People don't age out of core issues. You know, as people age, it's not a person turns 65 and they no longer have a personality disorder. A person turns 70 and they no longer have unresolved trauma from childhood. These issues still need to be addressed. It's important. Two of the best predictors of successful treatment is the relationship with the therapist and continuing care and availability of support systems in continuing care. That's why alumni support is huge with all patients, but especially important for older adult patients to have alumni support and family support. As we take a little bit of look at baby boomers in treatment you'll see a higher percentage of illicit drug use. Baby boomers still tend to have, many of them, a romantic relationship with pot. The problem is the pot the marijuana that's smoked today and the THC concentration it's 10 times what marijuana was in the 60s and the 70s. And it does so much more damage so quickly to the brain. So when you hear that myth, well, pot's not bad, well, pot has a huge effect on the brain. Baby boomers are a group, and working with baby boomers, they are a group that they will hold the clinical staff accountable. When working with the baby boomers, they are a group that challenged authority, where in older adults, one of the values that they espouse is they're honest, they have integrity, they're hardworking, they're responsible. One of the biggest values older adults have, which make them so successful, is that they respect authority. Well, with baby boomers, they respect authority, but they don't just give that respect. They demand that respect. So they're going to hold staff accountable. If you show up for a group, you need to show up on time. You need to be ready for a group. They're going to let you know if they think that you're not prepared. And so more than any group, when working with this group, we need to make it collaborative in terms of working with this population. Okay. So at this point, I would love to take on any questions we might have, Dennis.
You bet. I'm just getting those questions together right now. Okay. And here's one. Given the ASAM revised definition of addiction, which suggests that the specific substances or behaviors are interchangeable, how important is it to address the use of switching addictions or substituting one substance or behavior for another?
Oh, it's very, very important. It's like switching addictions is like switching seats on the Titanic. We know that alcohol and drugs, they will release a chemical in the brain dopamine, which seeks that midbrain, that mesocorticolimbic pathway, that reward pathway. And so it doesn't matter what they use, it still releases the chemical to the brain. It's important to remember now, we do need to separate central nervous system depressants and central nervous system stimulants, but they all reach the same receptor sites in the brain. So what we will have, if a person says, well, I haven't drank for a week and I didn't have problems, well, but they were taking benzodiazepines, well, guess what? Benzodiazepine is also a central nervous system depressant and hits the same receptor sites in the brain. But here's something that we do need to think about, though, as it relates to treating cross-addiction. Patients become, especially if they had more than one treatment sometimes, wise to the idea that they can't switch from one substance to another because they tried that and it didn't work. What we really need to be mindful of as professionals is switching from a substance to a behavior, and those process addictions, that produces a dopamine release as well, which could trigger the person back to the substance. And so that's huge. It has to be, it's vital that it's addressed in treatment, vital. It can't go unaddressed because it's just a black hole waiting for the person, in my professional opinion, to fall into if we don't address that.
Mm-hmm. Can you place older adults in a group with younger adults as long as the therapist understands the specific needs of older adults? Is there any benefit that can result from that kind of mixture?
Well, yes, there's a benefit in terms of placing them in a group. We do know because this program's been, I've been the director of this program, running this program for more than 10 years, and this program's 15 years old, that they do better in the environment of their peers. But yes, there is value. I even do here what's called an all-generational group, where all of the women on campus and all of the men on campus, they have grouped together. And I can see in those groups where older adults really respond to the energy from the younger individuals. And so, yes, there is value in that. But in terms of their whole program, no, I don't. It doesn't work best. Now, the recovery process for all of them are the same. Absolutely the recovery process for all. But for optimal results, age-responsive treatment works best. But certainly there's value in having them in a group. So,
okay. Well, thank you, Juan. Another question. If you can speak to the issue of prescription drug abuse and how it can be different in an older population compared to a younger population.
Well, prescription drug abuse for older adults most times will start for legitimate medical reasons and get out of hand. So I spoke during the presentation of when it starts for legitimate medical reasons that they'll be taking it as prescribed. Well, as tolerance builds and that sort of thing, as prescribed, moves from 30 pills a month to 60 to 90, and with the physiological changes in the body, the person can't handle it. You see falls and things start happening. Oftentimes, for younger individuals with prescription drugs, the need for the prescription drug will be manufactured. People will, younger individuals will build a stash of MRIs. We know, especially here in South Florida, the pills are referred to really as the new crack. They'll buy pills off the street, buy other people's prescriptions. And so the psychological and the psychogenic component of that is that when all medical tests will indicate that there's no reason for the person still to be having pain, the person will still say they're having pain. On the other side of that is that we know that the opiates will, for legitimate pain, the opiates just themselves, taking medication for that, will lower the person's threshold for pain. So if it's a legitimate pain issue, the best way to treat that is from an approach that, first of all, that includes psychotherapy, non-addictive medications, teaching the person behavioral techniques, meditation and relaxation, and using aquatherapy and acupuncture and deep muscular massages, just a full approach. But in terms of just prescription drug use, the biggest difference between younger individuals and older adults will starve for legitimate medical reasons.
Okay. Juan, do outpatient treatment programs work for older adults? It seems like there are very few programs in the country that are outpatient. According to the questioner, most seem to be inpatient.
There is problems a lot of times as we try to place older adults and outpatients, depending on what part of the country they live. A lot of outpatient programs are in the evening, and a lot of older individuals don't drive, or a lot of outpatient programs contain a lot of younger individuals that they don't relate to. So we tend to see a higher struggle with retention in outpatient programs, but there are some good ones out there too. And not that any of them are bad, but some that work better for our older population, where they do more day programs and that sort of thing that'll work for an older adult. That is a challenge. What we will tend to do, it just takes longer in primary treatment and residential treatment when working with older adults. So what might work better for an older adult is to have them in residential component longer and for a longer period of time, and at the same time having them build their own sober support network through the 12 steps and getting an AA sponsor, their schedule of meetings, and getting into recovery while they're still doing treatment, so that they can walk right into that recovery lifestyle when they leave treatment, and maybe for continued issues follow them up with an individual therapist that's an addiction therapist.
Okay. If resistance is a core part of addiction, are seniors more resistant, and what intervention would you recommend to break through that, if they are?
Well, resistance, denial, comparing rather than identifying, that's just a normal part of this illness. And I can just tell you, over the years, I've seen an 18-year-old, a 38-year-old, a 48-year-old, and a 78-year-old all standing at the med window trying to dope fiend the nurses out of another dose of detox medication. So the resistance in there, but I think it's important at the approaches to working with the older adults, and Rogerian therapy, advanced, of course, we all know by Carl Rogers, where it says the therapeutic relationship in and of itself is the most important tool in the therapeutic process, is huge when working with older adults. And establishing the relationship, establishing the rapport. I once had a lady back years ago when I was one of my first cases, and the only thing that she would talk to me about was her dog. If I mentioned alcohol, no. Steps, no. And so for the first 2 weeks, we just talked about that dog. And guess what? She began to trust me, and she's sober today. And so, Dennis, I don't care if it can be our colleagues, our neighbors, our children, our cashier at the grocery store, our pets. People know when you love them, and they know when you don't. And when people know that you genuinely care about them, you can get past resistance and everything. When people know you genuinely care about them, you can be effective with them.
That's well put, Juan. With that, we need to start moving into our concluding remarks, Juan.
Okay.
I'd tell the audience at this point that we've recorded and saved all the questions so that our sponsor can take time and answer them individually following this webinar. But Juan, I know you had a couple of comments to follow the webinar, and why don't you take it away with those? Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and I'd just like to talk a little bit as we're about to close, that I want to talk a little bit about the relationship with Hanley Caring Centers. We are one center, one program together. Our affiliation We began this process a whole year ago, and what it provides us and gives us the opportunity to do is to really make a difference in the lives of individuals, families, communities that are affected by this horrible illness of disease of addiction. And what we have the ability to do now is treat people from the age 13 to 113. I mean, and it's just such a broad spectrum of people that we can treat. And our combined operation gives us the largest nonprofit addiction treatment program in the nation. And for us, it's just so important that the whole entire family gets the treatment they need. And our goal is to fight this illness. I was recently talking with the daughter of Richard Karen, who's the Karen from Karen Treatment Centers. I was recently talking with her a few weeks ago, and she shared a story with me. Her name's Linda Karen, and she shared the story with me that the alcoholics would come home with dad, and as children, the alcoholics always got the bed, we got the couch, and if there was more alcoholics that needed the couch, then the alcoholics got the couch, and we took the floor. Well, what she was saying is that philosophy and that thinking is still the way we think as an organization today. The alcoholic, the addicted individual, those families get the bed. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for sitting in with me today. And back to you, Dennis.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Juan, for that presentation. And let me remind everybody just a couple of items. There is an opportunity to learn more about upcoming webinars by visiting our websites. You can see the sites on the screen. We also have online communities on Facebook and LinkedIn so that we can continue the discussion. Regarding CE credits, those of you who have viewed today's presentation and want to get your CEs, please click on the green CE certificate button at this time, which is located on the bottom of your screen over on the right-hand side. That will enable you to generate your CE certificate for this event. You must have watched the event in its entirety in order to get that CE certificate. And if you have any questions regarding CE certificates, please go ahead and send to the email shown, info@vendomegroup.com. Also, this program will be archived for 1 year for your convenience. Within the next few days, you will get an email with a link that will allow you to download the presentation slides and view a recording of today's event. Once again, thanks to Juan, to Karen Treatment Centers, and the Hanley Center for making today's program possible, and thanks to all of you for participating today. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you.